Malcolm X, a man born of humble beginnings, fought for rights and equalities of African Americans through any means necessary, helping fuel the civil rights movement until his assassination caused it to deteriorate as a whole. This is Malcolm X, The Death of an Era.
And then the criminal who attacked the victim accuses the victim of attacking him. Yes, sir. This is American justice.
Malcolm Little, born to Earl and Louise Little on May 19, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska, suffered from a troubled and prejudiced childhood, leading to his involvement in the civil rights movement. Prior to his birth, his father's prominence as an advocate for the Garvey movement, a movement describing how African Americans should create and live in their own country in Africa, prompted the Ku Klux Klan to force the Littles to move, as they would not stand for Malcolm's father spreading trouble among the good Negroes of Omaha. 1 year after Malcolm's birth, Earl Little bought a house in Lansing, Michigan, in the white area of the town. A court case from the property owners ensued, ruling Earl Little could own land there but not live there, therefore evicting his family. However, before the eviction, Malcolm watched a white supremacist group burn his house to the ground, later stating how the incident caused his first revelation on racial prejudice in America. On September 28, 1931, tragedy struck the Littles once again when Malcolm's father was found dead in the street, hit by a streetcar. Because the authorities ruled his death a suicide, not a hate crime like Malcolm's family believed, Louise could not collect on his life insurance policy and turned to welfare to support her 8 children. Raising all of her children by herself caused her sanity to wear thin, and in 1939, tragedy struck again whenever social services declared her legally insane, sending her to the Kalamazoo State Hospital in Kalamazoo, Michigan. At this point, Malcolm had no father, no mother, and his siblings were dispersed across multiple foster homes. He started having trouble in school, causing the district to place him in a detention home. Whenever his host family enrolled him into Mason Middle School, he rose to the top of his class, telling his teacher that he wanted to become a lawyer. The teacher replied by telling him becoming a lawyer is an unrealistic goal for a Negro. In his autobiography, Malcolm states this was a big turning point in his life, as it again reinforced the grudge America held against blacks. In 1946, courts convicted Malcolm to theft, breaking and entering, and illegally carrying a weapon, sentencing him to 8 to 10 years in prison. His brother periodically visited him, teaching him about the Nation of Islam, giving him books to read, and encouraging him to stop eating pork and stop smoking. Intrigued by the idea, Malcolm began reading and educating himself as much as possible, as he wanted to write to a leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad. He admired Muhammad's teachings of black supremacy, the separation of blacks and whites, and the rejection of the civil rights movement, for its emphasis on integration. He converted while in prison, changing his name to Malcolm X to disassociate with his slave name Little.
Muhammad to walk around with these names, and therefore he teaches us that during slavery, the same slave master who owned us put his last name on us to denote that we were his property. So that when you see a Negro today who's named Johnson, if you go back in his history, you'll find that he was once his grandfather, or one of his forefathers was owned by a white man who was named Johnson. If his name is Bunch, his grandfather was owned by a white man that was named Bunch.
Would you mind telling me what your father's last name was?
My father didn't know his last name. My father got his last name from his grandfather, and his grandfather got it from his grandfather, who got it from the slave master. The real names of our people were destroyed during slavery.
After his release, 7 years later, Malcolm went to Chicago to meet up and study with Muhammad. Eventually, Muhammad assigned Malcolm to Mosque No. 7 in Harlem, New York, where he began to perfect his recruitment methods. Malcolm's methods made Mosque No. 7 the largest in the United States, but he was dissatisfied with the rate growth in the Nation of Islam. However, he rose to national fame in 1957 whenever the police beat and detained a member of the mosque, Johnson X. Hinton. Malcolm seized the opportunity of staging a massive 2,000-person riot in front of the Harlem Police Department, demanding the police to administer medical attention to Hinton. When the ambulance arrived, Malcolm dispersed the crowd with the wave of his hand. He later sued New York City for the police brutality and won the largest settlement of the city's respective history. White people across the country began fearing and respecting him because of his powerful belief that whites must pay for their crimes and that blacks should get justice by any means necessary. He scorned and denounced Martin Luther King's movement of peace and integration, as he saw it, blacks becoming defenseless to whites' abuse and hatred. The Nation of Islam silenced Malcolm after his comments about JFK's assassination, allegedly because Malcolm felt JFK did not fulfill his promise to blacks and that the chickens had come home to the roost. In 1962, because of this and the discovery of Elijah Muhammad's adultery, Malcolm departed from the Nation of Islam.
Though only in the form of rumor, that there has been a great deal of apprehension at my being out of the black Muslim movement on the part of the black Muslims themselves. And I had stated in a newspaper article about an effort to take my life back in January, and at that time the Muslims denied it. In fact, they tried to make it appear to my brother that I was insane.
After his departure, he went to Mecca and discovered the true teaching of Islam involves unity and peace, not separation and hate. He converted to Islam and came back to the United States willing to work with Martin Luther King Jr. and his ideals, though still disagreeing with his message of peace. He knew the Nation of Islam was going after him because he exposed Muhammad, and on February 21st, 1965, while speaking in the Audubon Ballroom in Manhattan, New York, a man rushed in and shot him in the chest with a sawed-off shotgun, resulting in his death hours later and the quelling of the momentum of the civil rights movement. Malcolm X chooses large influence and popularity gained through his association with the Nation of Islam to first preach his message of hatred and counter-racism and his message of peace and unity. While speaking on behalf of the Nation of Islam, he spoke the message of him hating white people, making him a racist himself. He felt as if whites and blacks must be separated for peace to occur, effectively starting his own civil rights movement based on his own beliefs. His lack of the will to work with King and the other civil rights leaders led to his eventual defeat of the civil rights movement, as Malcolm refused to combine their followings to defeat their common enemy of racism. His belief of violence kept the civil rights movement from making significant progress in tearing down the wall of racism, therefore inhibiting the progress of the country as a whole. However, Malcolm's pilgrimage led to his discovery of Islam's true message of peace, making him want to work with Martin Luther King to end racism in America. It caused him to have new faith for integration and the message for more than just black people, as he wanted to convert the civil rights movement into a human rights movement. He started inspiring blacks around the world, starting another civil rights movement in countries like Sudan and Kenya. He showed the world racism was a world problem, not just an American or Negro problem. His large influence led to his eventual assassination. He shook the world first with his message of hate-mongering, followed by tranquility and unity. Therefore, the pain and suffering Malcolm endured as a young child allowed Malcolm to rise to the duty of becoming a prominent civil rights activist. His powerful speeches made around the world influenced copious amounts of people and struck fear into the hearts of many others. Malcolm X, the man who supported human rights inside and outside of America, took the world by storm in his attempt to end racism.
You try, just try.